Hi, my name is Leah Day, and welcome to this video for the Free Motion Quilting Project. Today we're going to take all of these beautiful pieces of hair that we've taken so long to foundation piece. We're going to put them together and get them stable on the background of this quilt. So let's get to it and see how this works step by step. Okay, so it's time to put these pieces together, and one thing that you're going to want to do kind of to prep all of them generally is to clip that seam allowance down to 1/2 inch on the folded edge. Now the not folded edge, go on ahead and leave that long. We can clip that down later, it does not matter. Okay, so I'm going to lay this out, and I'm using my master pattern on the bottom. That's going to be my guide. And I'm going to lay out my piece, and I know that the red one goes up here at the top. And sometimes you might find, maybe your piece, the template that you used wasn't exact or it didn't fit completely. Just try and get it as close as you can to line everything up. Because honestly, when it comes to an applique this big, you're going to have some shifting, some wiggly wobbliness, and that's fine. The best thing to do is just to get everything lined up as best you can. And you can see here, when lining up this piece of red with the purple, I really want to be mindful about this area right here, because these two turned edges are going to be going on top of that green edge and matching up with a turned edge of blue. And so I really want all of this to be a nice, perfect transition. I want that to be a nice smooth curve when those pieces come together. And so this is feeling pretty good to me. I'm going to start here and just lift this up, this purple piece up, and run a line of glue, starting at the tip, and I only want to work about 1 inch at a time. I'm going to fold it back down, hold it in place, and the nice thing about working on a pressing board is you can pen through it, so I can even pen this to secure it, but really I just need to get it, grab my iron, and hit it with my iron. And the Elmer's glue, it's going to heat up, and the iron is what is drying the Elmer's glue quickly. And so that's going to be bonded just long enough so I can get it to my sewing machine and stitch this seam. So now I'm going to again lift up and run my glue. And I know this is hard to see because my angle is one where I can see what I'm doing, but probably it doesn't look like much from above. But I just lay that back down. I want to work about 2 inches at a time. Whenever you see something like that is just looking like it's poking out a little bit to me, you just kind of, gently use your finger to manipulate the fabric and then press it back in place. And if a piece gets totally wobbly bobbly on you, if it's just totally wrong, take it off, press it, use some more starch, wrangle it back into place. Do not let the fabric beat you. So long as you have long enough seam allowances, as long as you've not clipped everything to death, you can always get a piece back under control. And you can already see, I just love these textures that we're getting. We've got this beautiful diagonal texture in the red, curling around, and I really think that's gorgeous. And then we've got this gorgeous braid in the purple. I am just so tickled about how this came out. Okay, now lift this section, and once you get a little bit more confident and moving quickly, you can grab your glue and run a bead all the way up. The one thing, you don't want to use this Elmer's glue if you don't have a fine tip, because otherwise you're going to be working with way too much glue. So make sure you either get the fine glue tips from Sharon Chamber or use Roxanne's Glue Baste It, which has a very tiny tip. Now the one thing, if you use a long line like I just did, you might have an issue with your seam allowances wanting to pop down with you. So just be careful as you lay it all out and give it a press. I really like to work with about 2 pieces at a time like this. I'm going to be building up off of this purple section. Because the purple section, because both edges are turned, it's technically on top of everything else. Everything else builds off of this. And so that looks really good to me. I am very, very pleased with how that's come together. I've got some lint here, so I'm going to grab my lint roller. I don't want anything to get caught when I go to stitch this. Okay, now the one thing before we stitch it, we need to remove the freezer paper. And so just very gently pull this out. The place to really be careful is down here, because that can turn your tip into kind of a nightmare. So I'm going to grab that tip and I'm going to pinch it with my thumb real tight. I'm going to zoom in so you can see this better. So I'm going to grab this tip and pinch it real tight and actually kind of tear the freezer paper instead. I'm going to leave the freezer paper, that's that little tiny bit in that tip. It's not going to bother anything. The quilt will it'll just be absorbed by the quilt. That is just fine. Now I'm going to remove the purple. I'm being very, very gentle. And again, I'm going to, and see, I've got the purple kind of tucked in here down, and it could be a lot more tricky to get out. So again, I'm going to grab that tip and tear the paper out. You see how much I ripped out? All that is left in that purple tip. That's going to be just fine. I've done this before. Yes, some of my show quilts have freezer paper in the points, and it's alright. It's no big deal. So far I haven't been flagged. A judge has not been able to see it or feel it. They don't have x-ray vision, so that's going to be just fine. Flip it over again, and you can see you might have an issue with your seam allowances going a little wobbly-bobbly. After you tear the freezer paper out, just lay everything out again. Be gentle. Lay everything out again. Make sure all the edges are turned, and again, hit it with your iron. Okay, that is very nicely pressed. Now let's move to the sewing machine and secure these two pieces in place with some stitching. Okay, so we're at the sewing machine and ready to get started zigzagging these two pieces together. And the first thing I want to tell you is I am not using regular thread. I am using YLI wash away thread, and there's one reason why. I want these stitches to wash out later. I do not want them to be permanent. I need something that's going to hold these stitches securely together so that these pieces are not going to come apart, so that they will be secure enough to go into the quilt, so that the whole quilt can be constructed and put together and all these pieces overlaid on top of one another, but securely enough that I can move it around, I can take it off my wall, I can put it back on the wall, I can do whatever I want to with it, and it's stable. Now, you may not choose to do it this way, and that's perfectly fine. I'm sharing this with you, and I'm showing you all these steps in the exact way that I will make this quilt. And that means that this is truly the way that I make this. And I've done this several times with many different forms of piecing and applique, where I use water-soluble thread for, more than anything else, a stabilization, stitches that I know will come out. Understanding that a stitch on a machine is the most secure thing that I can possibly hold things together with. The glue, it's gonna get brittle, it's gonna pop off, it's not going to hold for the month or two that I'm going to continue to work on this quilt, and then I might not quilt it immediately. So I need something stable. So that's why I'm using the water-soluble thread, and I'm also using my walking foot. I've set this up on the Janome Horizon to use the even feed walking foot. I'm just using the standard zigzag, the middle stitch, with all the standard settings that it comes with. I think it's like 3 millimeters wide and 1.5 millimeters, that's the stitch length. So it's a pretty balanced, pretty big zigzag. It doesn't need to be tight. We don't need to satin stitch this thing. You know, if you wanted to go on ahead and satin stitch it with regular thread, that would be an idea. Personally, after Trapplique, I'm so sick of satin stitching, I don't ever want to do it again. So that's not something that interests me. I want to zigzag this now, and then later on in the quilting, I will secure it with lines of quilting in these areas. And so that way, all those layers will be secured, but without extra top stitching. So this water-soluble will come out. It's not going to stay in the quilt. It's not going to be unsightly. And so that other thing that it's really nice, if I stitch off, if I'm all over the place with my stitches, it's no big deal, because it's just going to come out. So let's get on the machine and see how this works. Okay, so I've stitched through a scrap. And then get to the end of that, and now I'm going to line up, and actually I was going to start at the tip, but I think I'm going to start the other way. I just feel like the tip is going to be such a delicate spot, I don't want to start right there. Okay, so lift my foot slightly, slide this underneath, and get started kind of slowly. You want to take a steady pace with this. And the reason why I'm using my walking foot is because we have so many layers going on here, because I want this evenly fed through the machine. It's very secure. I mean, everything is glued together, so I think I could probably get away with not using the walking foot. I think I probably could have even free motion quilted this together, you know, with a free motion zigzag. But just for safety's sake, and because this is the first time I've ever filmed anything like this, I decided let's stick with what I definitely know, and I know that a walking foot is going to work perfectly for this. I think a regular piecing foot would also work too, but this is just going to make sure everything stays nice and even. If that glue has popped up anywhere, if anything's unsecure, then everything's going to still stay just as flat and even as it was when the glue was fresh. So I think we're going to be good. Alright, I can speed up here. Once you feel more confident, just put your foot down, give your machine some gas, and see, I just got off quite a bit, but that's okay. I'm still catching that seam allowance in the red section. Now we're coming up on this tip, so I want to make sure that I catch it, but I don't want to send my needle down right through this purple tip. That would probably not be good, because it's really, it's one of those places in the quilt that's kind of delicate, so I want to be kind of mindful of that. So I'm going to bring it up here, and I'm probably going to stop about right there. Maybe 1 or 2 stitches more, 1 stitch more, and break the thread. Okay, so you can see I kind of missed that tip, and that's a good thing. I don't want to send my needle down through that. We've got a lot of layers, and I don't want to accidentally, you know, hit it and have everything just pop open. That has happened to me before. So that looks pretty good. Like I said, it doesn't have to be perfect. It's just stitching securely these 2 pieces in place, and now that they are secure, you can just take this seam allowance, this red, kind of pull it up a little bit and go in and clip that close. You want to clip that down now as close as you can. Leave the purple over here and the red edge over here alone. You're going to use those later. But this edge that's now secure, you can go on ahead and clip that seam allowance pretty close, about 1/4 of an inch, I'd say. And that will trim down the bulk, and so it's not going to pose too much of a problem when you're quilting it. Okay, so all 7 pieces of hair have been put together, and this is what they look like. So now it's time to take this giant piece. You can see it's all put together, and I've clipped the back side and tried to take out as much bulk as I could out of those seams. We're still probably going to have an issue in these 2 sections. I was skipping stitches as I zigzagged this with a walking foot, so I know that this is going to have some issues when we get into quilting it. But for right now, let's just go with it. It's all in one section, so we're going to set this aside and figure out where this is going on our background. And what I've done basically is taken the master pattern, and that is on the bottom, and this is how I line things up. This is how I line things up. Normally it might seem a little weird or counterintuitive, but this is exactly how I line up things with my big quilts, and it works really well. I take the master pattern, and that's on the bottom. And then let's say I have a point, and I do have a point, this point in her hair, right here, where all those pieces of hair to go together. That is the point I need to match up with the big lock of hair that we're putting on this background. So I basically need to know where that lines up with the background. And so what I've done is stretched out the background. I have actually pinned it in place starting at this star where the earth is. That's pretty much the only placement guide that I've got on this quilt. And so that has been pinned, and everything else has been kind of spread out and slid around it. And so it's nice and stable. But this edge is loose, so that way I could place this pen, and basically just placed it, ran the pen up through that point, and then spread out the quilt on top, and then had that pen come straight out right here, and I capped it with a pin more so it wouldn't pop off. Okay, so I know that that point is where that hair point should go. Now as for the edges I've got this line here, and over on the other side I've got another line where the hair runs to the side as well. So I've got those two lines, so pretty much between this point, this edge point, and this one over here, right here, I can kind of line this up generally across these 3 points. Now, is it going to be perfect? Is it going to be exact? Probably not. We might have, you know, this be 1/8 of an inch off of the original. It might be 1/4 of an inch bigger on all sides. It depends on what the foundation did. It depends on how things are angled. It depends on a lot. But here's the thing. I don't get too obsessive compulsive about my piece really fitting perfectly. All I really care about is that it's placed and her face will go in here and her body will go in here, and that this generally fits to the edge of the quilt. Let me pull down so this, you know, comes out further than the edge of the quilt so I can trim this off. That's my main concern. I don't want to have a situation where I've got, let's say, the edge of the quilt here and I've got a piece of hair, like let's say it was kind of doing that number, where the hair didn't fully reach the edge. That's not good placement. I want this to come all the way out. I want there to be waste. I want there to be more than enough so I can trim it down later. You know, you can only cut, you know, 1,000,000 times if you have more than enough fabric, but if you have things too short, then you're only going to be in a position of adding back. Okay, and so this looks pretty good to me. Like I said, here's my mark right here. Well, my fabric is more than 1 inch beyond it. Is that going to make or break this quilt? Absolutely not. This side over here, my piece is right here. My mark is right here. Well, my piece of hair, and I'm going to actually pull this pin out because I don't need it as a guideline, is going way beyond it. So what does that mean for the quilt? Well, I could try a couple things. I could pull back 1 inch, a full inch out. I would end up losing more of what I've pieced. I've taken a long time to piece it, so I don't really want to do that. Or I could push, you know, her more that way. And I think that's what I'm going to do. Basically what's going to happen is in the design, I'm still going to make her face and make her body the exact same way that they were originally designed. The thing I might adjust, might shrink down, is the breath coming out of her mouth. Those locks, I might do something entirely different with that. This is something where you have to kind of be flexible. You've got to master, but that does not mean it's set in stone. And sometimes it's nice to just change things up a little bit. I know that this is extending beyond on all edges. I like the placement. And so now it's time to put some pens in. And so I'm going to make sure that that placement stays true. And just go around and anchor this. And what I'll do is as I go around, I'm kind of pinning this to my pressing mat right now, and I want to kind of get it in at an angle so that way it's nice and locked in. Then I'll go around and pin more securely, and then I'll go around and hand baste this piece entirely in place. So through all these sections I'll run lines of hand basting with water-soluble thread. Why am I using water-soluble? Again, I don't want it to be in the quilt. I don't have to worry about picking it out. I don't want to worry about having to take those stitches out as I quilt or as I applique or as I stitch anything on top of this. I want it to know that it can be there and I don't have to worry about it, and I can just wash it out at the end. So this is looking pretty good. And you just work to smooth it out. You don't want any bubbles or ripples between the two pieces, and that's why I'm going to hand baste, because I really want these two to be firmly bonded together. So here I'll start pinning carefully from this point, and I'm feeling the blue background. I'm making sure that it's not creating pleats or rippling under my hand. I'm just going for accurate placement more than anything else. And every once in a while it's good to put everything down and smooth it out again. And always keep your pens kind of open on the edges. This is a slightly fluid way to work. You know, it's not exact by any means. You know, I'm still making sure that that's going to still be lined up, but pretty much everything else is kind of just as it lays, as it falls. That feels pretty good. And another way that this will be, nicely stabilized, I'm going to get this hair kind of pinned generally in place, and then I'll flip it over. Because of the two, the hair is thicker, it's more stable, it's flatter. It wants to be nice and flat. That's what it wants to do. I kind of forced it that way. The blue background is more pliable because it's only one single layer of regular piecing. And so it's more pliable and wiggly wobbly and stuff. It's going to be the thing I need to wrangle into control. So when I start to hand baste, I'm going to flip the whole thing over and hand baste from the wrong side of it. And I think that will give us even more stability and make sure that we don't have anything weird going on underneath this hair section. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pin this in place, flip it over, and then I'll show you some hand basting in just a second. Okay, so the quilt is ready to baste, and I'm basically just running lines that are parallel, kind of running along the lines of the hair actually. So I can kind of feel these grooves created from each lock of hair, and that's a good kind of base to hand basting this. I think anything that gives you a feel that you can kind of, a tactile feel, you can go through all these layers and guide you to stitch, I think is a good idea. So I'm just working with a needle and some water-soluble thread, tied a knot in it, and I'm just making some big stitches. And what I'm watching for, I just want to make sure that blue background stays flat underneath the hair section. And I might run into some thick sections, just kind of watch where your needle's coming up, but keep it flat as you make your stitches. Keep things flat, make sure that you're not getting bubbles or pleats in this. The hair section is a lot flatter and thicker, and so it wants to lay flat. However, this background is real flexible, so we just want to wrangle it into control. So I'm just making these big stitches, and it doesn't take very much time. So I'm going to keep working on this, get all these lines of basting in. It'll probably take 20 minutes or so, and then I'll meet you back on the machine as we do a line of water-soluble zigzag just along the outer edge, so that way all the edges are secure and stable in a temporary sort of way, so that way we can still slide her face and her body into the sections that we need to on this side. Okay, so we're back on the machine, and I have decided to do some of this basting by machine. And how I'm doing that is I've just switched to a straight stitch. I've still got my walking foot on, and I'm going to increase my stitch length to probably about as big as it can go, so that way I have a nice big wide stitch, and that's 5 millimeters. So whatever is the biggest stitch on your machine, that'll work fine. And I'm just going to run some lines up through these lines of hair. Because I've already stabilized this with hand basting, I'm pretty sure that things are not going to shift, things are not going to get wiggly wobbly. I'm just going to run some lines through here. So let's see how this looks. I'm going to stitch through my scrap first, and then get started on the edge of the quilt. And it's going to fly through because it's that big basting stitch. I think I'll pivot, turn the whole quilt, and just stitch right back down through that section, just like that. That's the nice thing. A walking foot is keeping everything in line, it's keeping everything nice and even, and it's moving very quickly. I can run 2 lines through each hair section in a matter of a minute. And you'll notice that I've already trimmed the edge of the quilt. I trimmed that and left myself, a good little 1/2 inch of excess on the outside edge. This whole quilt is going to be, matched with other things. I'm going to square it up later. I'm probably going to make this entire quilt bigger than what it is right now. So I'm pretty much going, this is just kind of a general cutting line for right now, and then I'll trim it up after all of the pieces are in place. So run your lines of basting stitches just like this, and then we'll tackle this outside red edge in just a bit. Okay, so I'm working on a red section right now, and I'm quilting up this line. This is just to baste it in place. You can see my lines of hand basting as well. You know, you can never have this too secure. You might, feel like this is a little overkill. Maybe it is, but I believe that you can never have things like this too secure. I'm going to stop it right there and pivot. But here's something that I want to be real careful about. I want to be able to come in here and trim up the seam allowance a little bit, so I don't want to catch it, and it can get quite thick in some places. So I want to just make sure that I'm running this line of basting stitch so it's at least 3/4 of an inch away from this folded edge. I just want to make sure that I'm able to trim up that seam allowance, and I'm even feeling for it a little bit here as I stitch through this section. I'm kind of guesstimating my space, making sure that I'm not going to catch it in my needle. And if I do, it's no big deal. I can just clip those basting stitches along with the fabric, but I think this is going to work out just fine. Okay, so now it's time to trim up those edges. So basically just take it and very carefully work from the tip. And I'm not going to trim this up too much. Really just getting it down to 1/4 of an inch I think is best. So that way it doesn't produce so much bulk underneath that edge. And make sure you don't catch the quilt back. That would be very bad. Make sure you don't catch that background. So I'm running my finger under the blade to make sure that I'm only clipping the red section that I want to clip. Okay, so I'm going to trim this down and then we'll zigzag it in place. Okay, so let's switch to a zigzag. I'm just using that same middle zigzag and the standard settings that it uses. I'll stitch off my scrap and work my way into the quilt. And it's kind of a little adjustment. Going from that basting stitch to this stitch is quite a change, so just remember it's going to be a lot slower feeding through your machine. And remember, the stitching is all going to wash out, so of course it's not going to look perfect, and that is just fine. One thing I'm doing here, I can feel when the seam allowances on my blue background lip up, and so I'm just gently sticking my hand under there and spreading them back flat. Sometimes they like to bounce up a little bit, and that's not good because you really don't want to have wobbly bobbly seam allowances going on right underneath and right in these spots. That could create some weird effects. And so now I'll do the exact same thing, zigzagging, basting, getting everything nice and stable on this red side. So that's it for this video. I really hope that you've enjoyed seeing how all of this works. You know, this is one of those situations where I'm trying this really for the first time. I've turned edges this way and put pieces together this way, but with plain pieces of fabric, single pieces of fabric, not with this level of foundation piecing. And so it's really opening up a whole new world, a new technique, a new fun thing to play with. But if any part of this video didn't make a lot of sense to you, that's okay, that's understandable, because this technique is still evolving. There might be some aspects of it that don't make any sense. Maybe a step or two that you're kind of like, well, why in the world is she doing that? And the answer is, you fall back on what you know. And a lot of times I'll pull back into techniques or steps like hand basting. I know how to do that. I know it works. Using Elmer's glue, I know that that works for me. So understand that if any part of this doesn't make sense to you, it might be something that you want to give a try with an open mind the first time around. If it doesn't work for you, no big deal. The point is to continue to try new things and to push your edge, because you never know when pushing your edge is going to come up with something this beautiful. So that's it for this video. My name is Leah Day, and this has been a video for the Free Motion Quilting Project. Find hundreds of videos on quilting at freemotionproject.com. Until next time, let's go quilt.